All summer long, I've been seeing TikToks of people in crop tops and tube socks set to songs like Rock Me Amadeus and Girls on Film, so I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive into the summer slasher trend that I've been seeing so much. All of the TikToks that I've come across usually fall into one of two categories. The first one being a fan cam style edit of pictures and videos of different summer slasher movies. And the second kind I was seeing is outfits that people would make at home to kind of recreate or were just inspired by the costuming from those same movies. The problem is that there are so many slasher movies that have come out over the past 6 or 7 decades. I feel like slasher as a subgenre of horror is a lot more structure based as opposed to something like found footage horror that is much more aesthetic based. So not all slasher movies are made equal. Not all slasher movies look the same. And I kind of had to narrow it down. Lucky for me, that part was very obvious. All of the music in these TikToks and these Spotify playlists are all exclusively 80s music. All of the outfits from the movies and all of the outfits that people are recreating at home are embodying 80s trends. And when you actually go through all of the TikToks, all of the Pinterest boards, some Instagram posts, all of the movies you see again and again are from the 80s. The movies that I saw the most often and I feel like best embody the summer slasher genre would be the Sleepaway Camp series that came out between 1983 and 1989. The first 4 Friday the 13th movies, which came out between 1980 and 1984, and also The Burning, which came out in 1981. I also saw plenty of TikToks featuring honorable mention movies that I'm gonna touch on later, like X, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Nightmare on Elm Street, or the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie that I wanted to be able to include, but I just couldn't. I feel like the core of this aesthetic is really those summer camp slasher movies, and so I'm only going to be talking about those for this video. I kind of saw that there were 3 main components as to whether or not a movie fit into the capital S summer slasher aesthetic, and the first one is that it actually needs to be a slasher movie. There needs to be a group of young adults or teenagers that are being harassed and murdered by a person or maybe a thing. Usually there's a specialty weapon like a machete or hedge clippers, and it also usually takes place around the anniversary of some prior awful event. The second is that it needs to not just be set during the summer, but also that summer needs to be integral to the movie itself, with all of the films that I believe gave way to this aesthetic being set specifically at summer camps. It allows the teens and young adults to be in a secluded environment away from real older adults and away from emergency services. Outside of the horror, it also gives audiences something to want, with them all being set at this very retro, picturesque, fun place where they can hang out with people their own age. And I say people their age because everyone I've seen participating in this trend online has been a teenager or has been my age, mid-20s at the oldest, and we are new to these movies. We didn't grow up with these 80s movies, and we didn't grow up with these styles and the clothing that we're seeing in these movies either. The third and most important part of this aesthetic is the youthful, fun, summery, and colorful 1980s style of costuming. You have lots of primary colors, horizontal stripes, crop tops, and short shorts for both men and women, and also this specific type of running short. Other common staple pieces you might see people wearing or putting online are things like tube socks, staff t-shirts, a little plaid, and maybe a crewneck sweater for the campfire. What we're not seeing though are the many fun 80s hairstyles that were in all of these movies and heavily contribute to the overall look of the costuming. From what I can tell too, they really resemble what regular people were doing with their hair in the 80s, and that's actually something I really love about this aesthetic because it blends all of those pictures and videos from the movies with random pictures you can find online of people's parents in the 80s just doing everyday things. So it's the combination of the genre, the setting, and the costuming that really makes or breaks this aesthetic. Like I said at the beginning of the video, there are plenty of movies that have scenes and moments that fit in with the rest of the vibe, and I will be using those as B footage, but the movies as a whole themselves don't match the aesthetic. Movies like The Evil Dead, The Blair Witch Project, and to me, It just don't fit the genre well enough. They're a little too supernatural and they don't have the right tropes that I would be looking for, like having sex right before dying or having a final girl. Then movies like Scream, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Jeepers Creepers just aren't set in the summer. And the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, which I wanted to include so bad, just has too strong of a 1970s aesthetic. You can look at the cut of her pants, look at the pattern on this guy's shirt, even Sally's hair, the long straight hair with the middle part is very, very 70s to me and just can't be at home in this very 80s based aesthetic. Lastly, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Us, and X were just too modern for me to include. Although watching those did inspire me to try to find a modern reboot, remake, or period piece that I can include in this video as like a little the exception that proves the rule section, only I wasn't actually able to find a movie I could do that with. So I was on the lookout for movies made post 2000 but that were set in the 80s, were summer movies, featured characters my age or younger, and were at least mostly a slasher movie. It Chapter 1 from 2017 and Fear Street 1978 from 2022, I believe, were the closest I could find, and they are really prominent in a lot of summer slasher TikToks and Pinterest boards, but I just don't think they really hit the mark. They were both a little too supernatural for me, and the characters just felt a little too young, especially It being more of a kids on bike type of horror movie. I don't think the CGI effects from the new movies holds up well against the practical effects of the older ones, and I don't think the costumes from the newer movies are up to par, probably just because they weren't made in the 80s. They didn't have access to those authentic and now vintage pieces that are the cornerstone of the look. Not to say that those movies don't have the occasional primary color or horizontal striped shirt, but they don't have the same visual feel to them that movies like Friday the 13th and The Burning do. And I really think I'm onto something with how I feel about It and Fear Street, because even though they are very popular in these TikToks, it's only the same 2 or 3 shots over and over again. For Fear Street, it's the entrance to the camp and then that girl Ziggy's one striped shirt. For It, it's the shot of Lover written on the cast, firstly, and secondly, the shot of Beverly jumping into the quarry because, swimming and lakes is a popular thing to have in these movies and on these Pinterest boards. But out of all those examples that you see in so many of these TikToks, only one of them is actually about the clothes, because the clothes from these 2 movies doesn't fit this very outfit-driven aesthetic. And I don't think there's anything wrong with the costuming in either one of those movies. I just think summer slasher as a trend is so niche and so narrow that if you want to make content for it that's not just the same 10 outfits from the same 8 movies over and over again, you have to bend the rules a little, and that's where things like Fear Street and It and that one piece of paper from I Know What You Did Last Summer start to come in. People do want to be making and consuming content about this. A lot of the TikToks I saw had hundreds of thousands, even over 250,000 likes and way more views than that. So why are we drawn to this? Why was this a micro trend for this summer? I think it's a mix of the fallout left over from that Stranger Things type of 80s nostalgia we've had, combined with the fact that the outfits are just that fun. The visuals of all of these 80s films, from the hair and the costuming to the coloring that you see, the lighting and the film grain, have held up really well over time, are incredibly visually cohesive and appealing to a new audience. And because of that, the looks in these movies come across as retro, vintage, cool, and desirable instead of outdated or old. Things often come back into style after a few decades, but we've had a ton of 80s inspired movies, music, TV shows, and fashion recently. The summer slasher trend trend, however, is not just generic 80s nostalgia, it's also a slasher nostalgia. People want to see a bunch of young adults hanging out in the woods together, no phones in sight, just vibes, wearing very specific outfits, getting murdered, the never-ending appeal of campiness and gore. What is not to love about that? As we get closer and closer to the end of the summer, I'm already seeing a lot less and less summer slasher content on my For You page. And I don't know if it's gonna make a resurgence next year or not. I do know that this year I have loved so much of the music and the movies that it's introduced me to. If you are interested in any of the movies that I've mentioned or showed on screen, I'm going to have all of them, plus all the movies I watched and didn't get to talk about, listed in the description of this video. Boo-doo, boo-boo, boo-doo, boo-boo-doo.